Thank you, Leah. Appreciate it. Leah's been so wonderful in the museum here. Been great. We appreciate this opportunity. This will be a fun night because we're going to talk about the Pony Express, and that's always fun. The Pony Express lasted only 18 months, but you think it would have lasted at least 18 years with all of the publicity and everything that we and teachers spend a little time on it in American history and so on. But the entire route of the Pony Express was nearly 2,000 miles from St. Joe, Missouri to Sacramento, and then the mail was hauled by steamboat over to San Francisco, so it made it to the coast. Anyway, it was cobbled together in only 3 months' time. Most of the route, which encompassed the states and territories of Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and California, followed the Pioneer Trail. They did follow the Mormon Trail into Salt Lake, that part of it. And there were relay stations along the way about every 10, 15 miles. Anyway, in order to change mounts, and in some cases the riders, shacks and barns were quickly erected along the route using whatever supplies were at their disposal. Years ago, I had a good friend from high school. He was my brother's age, a little younger than me. And I should acknowledge a dear friend of mine tonight. Lynn Sampson is here. We graduated from BY High together. There aren't too many BY High graduates still around. And we did such a great job, they closed the school, didn't they, next year? But anyway, in my case, I got to work on turning it into a library, so it was fun. Any rate, it's an honor to have you folks here tonight. I hope you enjoy this. I had a friend from high school that showed up at my bookstore a few years ago, and he had a box of books. I went through one of these yesterday at my store. He just wanted some information. He was wanting to sell off some things, but he didn't tell me what. And we opened the box, and there was an old Bible on top. He says, "Oh, that's nothing," and we put it aside. Well, I noticed that it was something, so I didn't say anything to him there other than just, "Well, I'd give you $500 for that right now." And I think that surprised him. But he went on through the box, and there were, and I would have had to tell him, of course, why I made the offer, but he was an old friend, so I thought I could get away with making him an offer. But there were a lot of books. There were some old millennial stars. There were some early LDS scriptures, things like that he inherited. He says, "This box just been kicking since my great aunt died. It's just been kicking, by the door." And I figured I need a new truck. And I'm thinking maybe I could get a down payment or something off this box of books. So we went through the books, and I acknowledged that there were probably about $5,000 worth of books there. It was a nice collection of books. Probably not enough to buy a truck, but at least maybe make a down payment at the time. This was years ago. And anyway, I said, but if you want to buy a truck, this old Bible you stuck over here, you could buy a truck with it. Because what it is, it had Russell, Majors, and Waddell stamped in the front. That's almost worn off on this one, but this is one of the dozen known Pony Express Bibles. And they were purchased by Alexander Majors, who was one of the three owners and the most religious one of the group. He's the one that devised the oath, that the riders had to take. Read that a little later. This one I got off an auction in California many years ago, but it was surprising to me that it's presented, it says, to William Dean by Majors, Russell, and Waddell. They actually went by Russell, Majors, and Waddell. Fort Bridger, Utah Territory then, December 15th, 1858. Well, the Pony Express didn't ride until 1860, but any of these Russell, Majors, and Waddell Bibles that survive are known as Pony Express Bibles, even though they were probably Expressman Bibles. The thing that shocked me about this one was that William Dean is a distant relative of mine. And he later settled down in Beaver, Utah, where Brigham Young had sent the Ashworth family to colonize years ago by the inscription. So that was kind of fun for me, but I didn't know that at the time. Well, just a few other artifacts, because this is artifacts tonight. And this is one of a couple documents I've got from Washington, D.C. It's a $10,000 promissory note. That was a lot of money back in May of 1860. 8 months after date, we agreed to pay on order to the Bank of the Republic, New York City, $10,000 for value received and charges the account of one transportation contract of the 12th day of April 1860, signed Russell, Majors, and Waddell, and it was to the Honorable James B. Floyd, the Secretary of War. At any rate, Camp Floyd was named after him here in Utah, but they changed the name to Crittenden after Floyd joined the Confederacy. But that happened a lot during that time. But anyway, this is one of the original notes establishing the Pony Express. It isn't original, so you might want to look at that. Kind of fun. And there's a book that I have here that's called 70 Years on the Frontier by Alexander Majors. Of the three founders, he was the most religious of the bunch. And like I say, he issued a Bible like that to each of his riders. Now, at one time or another, there were 80 riders going from the west to the east or from the east to the west on the Pony Express. Here's a picture, incidentally, of Alexander Majors. I don't know if you can all see that at the frontispiece of his book. This particular one is signed to him, inscribed to George Q. Cannon, Salt Lake City, Utah, compliments of Alexander Majors. So that was, What year? This came out a little later in his life. Let me see, I've forgotten the year. Came out in 1893, so this will be 30 some odd years after the Pony Express. There's another copy of this book that's here that's signed by Pony Bob Haslam, and he's very important in the story, and we'll talk about him just a little bit. For such a romantic story as the Pony Express, behind it, it was very short-lived, as I mentioned, about 18, 19 months. The reason for its existence really was to try to hold California, our furthest new state that had come in 1850, 31st state, into the Union, because it was during this time that things were breaking apart between the North and the South, and it looked like we're headed to a civil war. The only route for getting mail quickly to the West Coast at that time was by stagecoach. Ben Holiday got the government contract later, but they were running that down through the southern part of the United States, and there was a fear that if they continued to deliver mail that way, that California would go to the south, because all the news was coming through the southern states. And so that was another reason that Russell, the businessman, decided to approach James B. Floyd and get a contract. They never did get a contract, but they got some these illegal, later declared by Congress, illegal promissory notes to help pay the route. They became illegal when Floyd joined the Confederacy. So a lot of things became illegal. But anyway, that was the reason for its existence, basically, is to keep California in the north, and it was very short-lived. But the most important piece of information that was ever carried by Pony Express was carried by Bob Haslam and a few of the other writers, was the inaugural address of Abraham Lincoln. And they had waited for 5 months to get the inaugural address of James Buchanan, his predecessor. It took that long to get it, around the Horn by ship. And I guess that's before the stage line was going, that Ben Holiday got going. But even the stage line took 24 days to get from the east to the west. And the Pony Express owners, they set a goal of 10 days to get from one side of the United States, from the middle of the United States, St. Joe, Missouri, to to get to San Francisco, Sacramento. And then they went by steamboat to San Francisco. But anyway, that's one of the fun things about the Pony Express is that they delivered Lincoln's inaugural address to California and thus avoided the southern route, which the Union was worried they'd lose in the mail route if they didn't create some way to express the mail to get it quickly there. One of the fun pieces that we have in our collection is this little piece here. There's only about 250 known pieces of mail carried by the Pony Express. They're still in existence, and this one I've had for about 40 years. If you were to take a Kleenex and write a letter on it, that's the kind of paper this is written on. That's because it costs $5 a half ounce to send a letter by Pony Express. It'd be about 150 bucks today. So, very few people, private people, didn't use the Pony Express, okay? It was the big businesses and the government. That was basically who used the Pony Express. This letter's interesting. I don't have the envelope, which would be the most valuable part of it probably. But it's written from San Francisco. It's a business letter, February 4th, 1861. And I say the Pony Express only lasted for 19 months. So it started in April of 1860, and by October 24th, my mother's birthday, incidentally. October 24th, though, back in 1861, the telegraph finally got through to the West Coast. 2 days later, the Pony Express ceased operations. At any rate, this is kind of an interesting letter because it's just a business letter from San Francisco, signed by a Thomas Hambly was his name. But he writes, P.S. I write by Pony Express because there's no time to lose. So that's the postscript on the letter. Kind of a fun piece. And like I mentioned, there's the Alexander Majors was the religious guy of the three of them, and he's the one that made them all take a loyalty oath. We'll read that in a little bit. Riders were essentially the first jockeys, since they weren't the big burly guys. In fact, sometimes Bill Hickok's listed as an early rider. He never was a rider. He did work for the company for a while, but he was too big and fat to be a rider for the Pony Express. They had a strict weight limit of 100 to 120 pounds on the riders. So most of them were these tiny teenagers, young teenage boys that ran the mail. And it was one of the most dangerous jobs you could have, if you can imagine. But these kids were quite fearless. 6 of them got killed along the way. So it was not without its hazards, out of approximately 400 that rode during that year and a half. But it was not by far the most dangerous job along the route was to be a station manager, because the Paiute War opened up 2 months after the Pony Express started, and it was mostly in Nevada where a lot of the damage was done. A couple of the Pony Express stations were attacked and people were killed. In fact, Bob Haslam, Pony Bob, up here that signed this one book of Majors later, he was to ride, usually they rode about 75 miles. So they would change horses every 10 to 15 miles, there'd be a station. So about 180 stations from St. Joe, Missouri to Sacramento, California. And you would change horses about every 10 to 15 miles. The riders would last up to about 75 miles before they changed riders, and they'd get the rest, and they'd end up at what they call a home stop. And that's where they could have an overnight stay. There was bedding and there was meals and things like that. There was a little food along the way, and ammo, and of course changing horses along the way. But you're never quite sure if your next stop, if anybody be alive. So rather a dangerous job, okay? And it wasn't just that. They said by far worse than the Indians and the raiding parties and the outlaws sometimes were the storms. And you can imagine the cold during the winter. It was just terrible. Several of at least two of them froze to death, were found later. It's interesting, no bag of mail was ever lost, even though a couple of these guys were lost along the way. One of them, the guy never appeared, and they didn't find his mail sack for several years. But they got it, and they got the mail delivered.
What had happened to him?
What's that?
What had happened?
He'd frozen to death along the route, but they never found him. So he disappeared. He's the only rider that they never found a body on. So they don't know what happened exactly, but I think he probably froze. It was in midwinter. Well, Buffalo Bill and Wild Bill made a lot out of their connection with the Pony Express. Like I say, they both worked for the Pony Express, but whether either one of them was a rider or not, Buffalo Bill probably had the greatest claim to that. He was only a 14-year-old when he first joined Russell Majors and Waddell as an employee. And some of the information says that he did ride there, but whether he actually was a rider or just rode messages for the company between stops, whether he actually rode mail or just messages, doesn't matter, because without Buffalo Bill, we probably would not have heard much about the Pony Express. His shows made the Pony Express famous. And if you went to a Buffalo Bill Wild West show later, you would see them changing horses, changing the special saddle that they'd created, and throwing it over another horse and riding off. Anyway, the riders of the Pony Express were romantic heroes to the young ladies. When they'd come into the town, the young ladies usually baked goods for them, cookies, cakes. There's even some, in fact, the ladies stood in the street with offerings of baked goods for the riders to grab on their way through the town. The women who had the least amount left after the rider came through was deemed the most popular in the town. And to up the ante, one enterprising woman supposedly invented the donut hole. So you've heard of different people taking credit for the donut hole, but this is about the earliest example. She baked donut holes, making it easier to grab as the rider galloped by. Well, I told you a little about that old Bible that my friend brought in. We got my sister and brother-in-law here from back east and my wife tonight. And I was asked the question the other day whether anybody ever brought anything valuable that surprised me. And I says, I was telling them the story of this old high school friend, my brother's age, who brought in this stack of books. And the one book on top was a Bible. He says, this is nothing. And he went through, and we figured divvied up. There was about $5,000 worth of rare LDS books. But I said, if you're trying to buy a truck, you can buy it with that Bible. And that shocked him, because on it, like this Bible here, you could read Russell Majors and Waddell. And I says, do you know what they are? No. And he says, well, that's the Pony Express. There's only about a dozen of those known. And his was in better shape than mine is. And I says, if you ever want to buy a truck and want to sell that, I'll buy it from you, because it's the nicest one I've seen. But he says, no, I can't do that. It was my great-great-grandfather's. He ran a jewelry store in Salt Lake in 1860 when the Pony Express was running. And he told me the story because the story's written all over the front inside cover of the book by his great-great-grandfather. What a treasure. Anyway, he said that a young rider came in and he wanted to get a ring at the jewelry store for his girl. And he didn't have any money, so his great-great-grandfather gave him the ring for the book. And that's how the book left the writer's hands. You know, I often wondered this, the famous Mogilla, the famous saddle had 4 compartments. And one thing that they did on these, we thought it'd be fun to bring the horse in tonight. Actually, this is from the museum, so I'm really honored that they brought the horse in tonight. I'm told by Charlie that it's not as heavy as it may look, so it came in from the other room. But I knew they had one of these, and it's got very little metal on it, as you'll notice, just here. They put padlocks on this. The mail was wrapped. The first The first one of these was created right in St. Joe, Missouri, because the guy that made saddles just happened to be in the town that the Pony Express started at. And he tried to reduce the weight by using very little metal onto these things, but they did want them padlocked, so they had to have that in there. And the first rider that went west to Sacramento had 49 letters and 5 government documents wrapped up in. They were put in the 4 compartments. I used to wonder where they put the Bible, but if they carried a Bible, the Bible was probably in the saddlebag. I think a lot of them didn't carry the Bible because that's extra weight. And, but they were told to read the Bible and not to cuss and to, attend their church meetings and all that. One of the famous tourists through Salt Lake said that he never met a sober rider, though, so I guess they didn't enforce it a lot, and they said they could swear like stable boys too, so I guess they didn't enforce that a lot. But it was a good idea, and that was at least what Majors was trying to do here. Pony Bob I mentioned, and there's a book signed by him right here that he signed in 1896. He lived till 1912. He was probably the most famous of the actual riders, besides Buffalo Bill, who was the most famous. If he'd actually ridden the mail, we're not quite sure yet, even today. But Pony Bob was born in England in 1840 and was a Pony Express rider. Any rate, he was recruited by Boulevard Roberts to build stations along the way and decided to run from Friday Station, State Line, Nevada, to Buckland Station near Fort Churchill, 75 miles to the east. Perhaps his greatest ride of 120 miles in 8 hours and 20 minutes while wounded was an important contribution to the fastest trip ever made. Well, what happened was he came to the station of the next rider after having done his he actually did 190 miles because one of the stations was wiped out during the Paiute War, which started just 2 months after the Pony Express. And he got to the next station, and the young rider was too frightened. He says, "I'm not going out there, I'll get killed." And so Bob Haslam continued to take the mail because they said, "We don't care if you get killed, but the mail has to go through." So that was what their orders were, these young guys. And some of them did get killed. Anyway, but the mail always went through, one time or another. But at any rate, Haslam got to this station, and the next rider was too frightened to get himself killed riding through the Paiute War, which was going on in Nevada there at the time. And so Haslam continued to ride the mail through all of that. He ended up going, if you can imagine this, going 190 miles on his stretch. He got 9 hours of sleep. He hopped back on the horse, and on his way back found out that a couple of the stations had been wiped out, and he went 190 more miles, 380 miles. No other rider ever did what Pony Bob did. Just a young guy, 20 years old. He got shot by the Indians with an arrow through his cheek. And he was in horrible pain. Can you imagine riding with that halfway through his return trip? And it wasn't until he got to a safe zone that they were able to pull the arrow out of his cheek, and they took 3 teeth out too. So he lost those. If you look at a picture of him, his face is a little distorted because of that. But he was a hero to the Pony Express and to really early American history at that time. He's credited with having made the longest round-trip ride in the Pony Express. And I've told you the story pretty much. He continued to work after that as a rider for Wells Fargo after Pony Express went belly up. And the company, and after the Civil War, he scouted for the U.S. Army well into his 50s, which was pretty old at that time to be a scout. Later accompanied his good friend Buffalo Bill Cody on a diplomatic mission to negotiate the surrender of Chief Sitting Bull. who was killed at Wounded Knee, if you remember that. So the negotiations broke down. Sitting Bull was shot by his own Indian guards. At any rate, kind of another sad episode in the history of the American West. Well, we can bring the Pony Express to almost a town here by Orrin Porter Rockwell. We spent some time talking about Porter. He spent a lot of time in Lehigh. He spent a lot of time in Salt Lake. One fun story I like about Porter is he loved to go to the theater, the Salt Lake Theater. Brigham Young built the first theater west of the Mississippi because Brigham's father wouldn't allow him to do anything to entertain himself as a young man, and Brigham wanted the theater for his people. So they built the Salt Lake Theater. A footnote on that was that my dad's first architectural job was to design the DUP Museum. He was an architect back in the 40s, and the ladies, Kate Carter and the others, wanted a recreation of the old Salt Lake Theater. So that's why you have that. If you've been up there next to the state capitol on the west side, you'll see the DUP Museum. I highly recommend you go there because they have the greatest collection of material on early Utah history of any of the museums. Probably only challenged by what the LDS Church has, but they don't put a lot of their stuff on display like the DUP does. Anyway, Rockwell had a station that was just up here a little ways at the point of the mountain. I brought a document that I brought when we were talking about Rockwell because it's the only one I've ever had. I've got an arrest warrant for him too, but this is the only Rockwell document signed by him that I've ever seen. And the reason I know it's signed, he couldn't write, so he just signed an X. Okay, so you want to look at that. But he was accused of stealing cattle from the army at Camp Floyd. This is a little later, 1870s. And he said he didn't do it. It took 4 pages for somebody to write that up, his attorneys. And then he needed to sign it. And so the notary was William Clayton. You remember that guy? Wrote Come, Come, Ye Saints. And a good friend of Porter's, and he was the notary for this X. At any rate, he writes, this is Clayton's writing, Old Porter Rockwell, being first duly sworn, says that he has read the foregoing, and then a little caret was added, heard read the foregoing. And, and Porter's X is authenticated there by William Clayton. But he had a Pony Express stop. This is one little description I found on Porter's place. The westbound pony rider proceeded south along today's State Street to the next station, which was located just south of the Utah State Prison. That's been moved now. This was at Porter Rockwell's Hot Springs Brewery Hotel. The hotel and brewery made this a popular stopping point for travelers. A large adobe barn stood at the site well into the previous century. A stone monument, largely vandalized with plaques when they wrote this up, can be found at the southeast corner of the prison compound and north of the highway. Well, there wasn't much left, but it was a very colorful part of Utah history as well, since the Pony Express ran right down the town. Excuse me?
State Street?
Yeah, State Street in Salt Lake is what they were referring to, and they ran it down State Street at the time, and then his was the next stop, which was down here by this. We think there were about 180 stations across the West. Stations were usually located in remote areas decided by route efficiency rather than construction or supply convenience. Alexander Majors had to find riders and substitutes. He paid them $125 a month. The average laborer at the time made $1 a day. So if you were a skilled worker at that time, it was about $2 a day. So $125 a month for these youngsters was a lot of money. And you can see why they wanted the skinny, wiry ones, as the ad said, for them to be managers. That $125 a month, according to the autobiographies of several of them that received it, was around $4,000 today a month, which is pretty good for these teenagers. At any rate, they lived a dangerous life, and I've shown you the Pony Express Bible. Let me just see if there's some other things we can show you here. By a guy in St. Joe, Missouri, who had been making saddles for years and years. So it was kind of a unique situation. A couple other things I brought that would be of interest. First of all, the other side of with the Porter Rockwell document, I brought the original draft memorial to Congress from the Latter-day Saint territory of Utah in 1853. One of the very first acts they asked the Congress for was to build to the Senate an honorable House of Representatives and Congress Assembly. At any rate, they wanted a telegraph, to communicate. This was in 1853. Telegraph didn't come around until the time of the Pony Express, 1860-61. But the Latter-day Saints wanted it earlier because we're so far away. Communication was almost impossible. And that's another reason they pushed for the railroad. And the railroad was being built at this time too, but it didn't make it a promissory point until 1869. This document is signed by W.W. Phelps, who was the Speaker of the House, Willard Richards, President of the Council, and Brigham Young as governor. So you can see their signatures on there. So they wanted the Congress early on to build a telegraph, but that hadn't come. So they were great proponents of the Pony Express when it came. And the Latter-day Saints were among the people that really pushed Congress to help fund the Pony Express, but the government never did, and part of it was the Civil War that took place. Well, probably the greatest achievement of the Pony Express at the time was conveying the news of Lincoln's election in a matter of 10 days from St. Joe, Missouri, instead of the usual 2 weeks the southern route would take. And the southern route was run by Southerners who joined the Confederacy. So it is given a lot of credit for keeping the new state of California in the Union, the Pony Express. And that's probably the greatest claim to fame that it had. There were a lot of books, a lot of articles, and a lot of dime novels written about the Pony Express at the time. Any real Pony Express item is a rare piece today because, like I say, it lasted such a short time. I brought also this is from Nevada, but this would have been a ticket, regular Union ticket for President Abraham Lincoln for Vice President Andrew Johnson. This is 1864, so this is after the Pony Express, but during 1860, California could vote, and it was quite unique. And one item I've not shown before, the reason for the Pony Express was because California had taken off. Why had California taken off? Well, it was because of the gold rush. And it was, the gold rush was set off at Sutter's Fort in 1848. When they went back to try to figure it out, the man that discovered gold there, James W. Marshall, could not remember the date in which gold was discovered. And he guessed it was January 19th, 1848. And he put these little cards out as the discoverer of gold in California and put that date on it. Turned out it was the wrong date because he just had a weekly journal. He didn't put it down daily. But one of the four Mormon boys that was with him was a guy by the name of Henry W. Bigler. And I've not shown this before. This is Bigler's actual journal. And for January 24th, this day, some kind of metal that looks like gold was found in the trail race. That entry dated, the California Gold Rush has been used ever since. And it was a Latter-day Saint man that helped.
My great-great-grandfather, after gold was discovered, had come to California.
Yeah.
And he was acquainted with John Marshall.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, he was, because he...
Right.
Because he lived in, then it was called Hangtown.
Mm.
Now it's Placerville.
Sure, yeah.
But
I remember reading about Hangtown. That was quite a place.
he was acquainted with.
Wow. Well, that's neat. That's neat.
What was the date again, the actual true date
What's that?
of the discovery?
January 24th, 1848. Marshall didn't know it, so he guessed the 19th, but this journal entry put the exact date down. And so this is the date in American history, if you look up, is from Bigler's journal here. But I haven't shown the journal before, and I thought I'd show that.
Gold rush of 1849, though.
Yeah, well, they were 49ers by the time the big group, the word got out and everybody came. Sam Brannan, of course, famous Latter-day Saint that was head of the Brooklyn Saints that came around the Horn and spent a little time at the Sandwich Islands before they came to Yerba Buena, which was the name changed to San Francisco. Anyway, they came in 46, and it was early on that Sam Brannan heard from other Latter-day Saints who were working there. One of the young men, these were all young men. Marshall was hired by Sutter to build a lumber mill, and so that's what he was trying to do when they found, in the mill race, this gold-looking metal. They weren't sure it was gold or what until they got it assayed, and it turned out to be almost pure. It was great. Anyway, there were some Mormon boys that were hired after the Mormon Battalion. Remember the March of the Mormon Battalion where they went down to San Diego? And eventually they were let go at San Diego, and some of them came up to Los Angeles, and a few of them got hired by Mr. Sutter to work with Marshall in building this lumber mill for him on Sutter's property. And it was at the time of the discovery Marshall found that piece of metal. Incidentally, that piece of metal is believed to be in a museum still. They've found that piece of metal that was passed down by Marshall. Marshall ended up pretty much bankrupt, as did Sutter. And most of the men that came out didn't make big hauls. Some of them did. But the ones that really made money off the California Gold Rush were the outfitters, the suppliers. And Sam Brannan was chief among the early ones. And when he got the word in Yerba Buena, I don't know if they changed the name yet, in San Francisco that gold had been found on the American River, he got a little vial of it, and he went up and down the streets of Yerba Buena, gold discovered, in the American River. Well, the word got picked up by newspapers and eventually was taken to the east. What really set off the gold rush, the news of the gold rush, was President Polk announced it in his presidential address to Congress in early 1849, and that sent thousands of people. If you've seen those pictures of those ships out in the San Francisco Bay and so on, pretty amazing. But if it hadn't been for the gold rush, there wouldn't have been any need for a Pony Express. And I guess that's the point of talking about the gold rush. This is a little book on the life and adventures of James W. Marshall, the discoverer of gold in California. And I've had this for many years. It's not in the best of shape, but it's presented to the Reverend Henry W. Bigler by his friend James W. Marshall, Farmington, Davis County, Utah. So Bigler, incidentally, later became one of the early temple workers in St. George. I've got another journal where he records all the people he went through the temple with and so on. So there are some Utah connections, both with the gold rush and with the Pony Express. That was the way to keep 360,000 people that had moved to the West Coast informed as to what was happening here. One of the most colorful adventures ever done in the United States. Total failure as far as financial. It lost at least $200,000. It's a lot of money back then. But it was twice as fast as any competitors could come. Incidentally, the loyalty oath: I will under no circumstances use profane language. I will drink no intoxicating liquors. I will not quarrel or fight with any other employee of the firm, and that in every respect I will conduct myself honestly, be faithful in my duties, and so direct all my acts as to win the confidence of my employers, so help me God. And that was the oath that each of them took. But like I say, there were many reports that some of them couldn't stay out of the bars. But they were tough young guys that did this. And they became famous throughout the entire world. They helped make the American West come alive to foreigners as well as here in the United States. Are there any questions or anything that we can talk about?
Where did the name come from?
Pony Express? Well, it was kicked around quite a bit before the Pony Express actually came around. But the name came from several different sources, you know, mostly at one time or another, Russell's given some credit for helping name it. But there were earlier people that named it before it was even started. Congressmen and people like that wanted to see California held into the Union. So it's quite a few people are given credit for the name Pony Express. But probably Russell, the businessman, takes more credit than anyone.
What stations would be around here?
Yeah, they were, let me show you those. There were about 180 stations altogether. And the ones here, they broke it down into 5 groups of stations, divisions. Division 1 started in St. Joe in Missouri. And then there are 13 way stations in Kansas. There's another group of them in Nebraska. The ones in Utah were in Division 4 of the 5. And the Utah ones were, these are the Utah ones. The Needle Rock Station, just right inside, that was probably in Wyoming territory. And then the next one was Echo Canyon Station, if you know where Echo Canyon is. And then the Halfway Station, and the Weber Station, Brimville Emergency Station, Carson House Station, East Canyon Station, Wheaton Spring Station, Mountain Dell Station, Salt Lake City Station, and then Trader's Rest, Traveler's Rest Station, and then 107, and the 107th one was Rockwell Station, the Hot Springs Hotel and Brewery, just up the road here. That was number 107. Dugout, Joe's Dugout Station, it's 108. Camp Floyd, Fairfield Station, it's been restored, that's 109. The Pass, East Rush Valley, Point Lookout, Government Creek Station, Simpson Springs, Red River Station, Dugway Station, Black Rock Station, Fish Spring Station, Boyd Station, Willow Spring Station, Willow Creek Station, Canyon Burnt Station, and Deep Creek Station, and those are all the Utah ones.
Well, okay, when you go to the route from Salt Lake and down here and then to Camp Floyd and over to Dugway,
Yeah.
and where did they go? Because it's a lot of desert there.
Yeah, they went across the great American desert. Yeah, they did.
Where did they go after Dugway?
Well, that would have been, let's see, Dugway was, let's see, they went to Camp Floyd and then out that way, Rush Valley. I'm not sure where a couple of these are. Dugway Station was 116, and then they went to Black Rock Station, which has got to be the Great Salt Lake, where Black Rock was. Yeah, so they went around the lake and that way.
When you go up to Eagle Mountain, you go up on
Yeah.
the Express Parkway.
Where Eagle Mountain is, yeah, now.
And just, there's a post sign up just past Hidden Hollow Housing Development,
Mm-hmm.
which there's a sign somewhere over there that says it was part of the Pony Express Parkway.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's great. Good to know. Yeah, Joe.
That revolver, was that the one type they used?
What was that? I'm
The
sorry.
gun that you have there, was that the type they used? The gun?
Oh, the gun? I brought a, yeah, this was not a Pony Express gun. This was actually given to me by my dad-in-law, my wife's father. And but it's the kind of gun they would have carried there. This is a Navy Colt, 1851 Navy Colt. But it's they'd either have like an Army Colt 1849 and a Navy Colt something. Some of them actually had sawed-off shotguns. When we were doing the one in Puerto Rico, remember we had his great-great-grandson, and he said that Porter was known for two big sawed-off shotguns that he'd carry. Well, he wasn't a rider, but he certainly was a station master. And he said, well, as we know, Porter was a good shot. Plus, he had a prophetic blessing that helped him survive. Anyway, the Pony Express is one of the most exciting pieces of American history you can read about. And anyway, I hope this has been fun. Is there any other questions or anything anybody'd like to ask? Thank you for this opportunity. Appreciate it.